In the year 2020, I started a podcast about movies. Some episodes occasionally focused on other media as well. As I dealt with threatening interdimensional beings, I eventually met my other self from another universe where all the stuff I talked about got delayed. As it turns out, the stories as me and my guests described them were presented very differently in that other universe. So I continued podcasting these recaps, which apparently sound like improvised reviews, to entertain listeners of that other universe while they waited for the new release dates. Some episodes even focused on content of years past that did not come out in that other universe for whatever reason. The year is 2022. The podcast is now bi-weekly, unless stated otherwise. My name is Steven Schinder, and you're listening to Delayed Replay. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Delayed Replay, that podcast where we talk about movies that came out in our universe but got delayed in that other universe. I'm your host, as always, Steven Schinder, and joining me again to talk about yet another multiverse movie, it is Mr. Multiverse. How's it going?
Good. It's funny you bring me in on a movie about multiverses again.
Yeah, it's no coincidence. So this is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. So I guess first off, let's go over what were your overall thoughts on Into the Spider-Verse? Like, you've kind of alluded to it before, but just again reiterate, I guess.
Into the Spider-Verse is actually not might be is my favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. Like, it's a beautifully animated story. I think the composure of the music as well as the soundtrack is amazing.
Spectacular, you might say, even.
Spectacular as well. It's Peter Parker Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's superior, ultimate.
Non-stop. I'll stop. Anyway, it's definitely a story that I thought had a lot against it. It was being an origin story for Miles. It was also being a Spider-Verse story, and it was juggling all these characters. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way they can do all of this and pull it off. And after the end of the movie, I was like almost in tears of how good it's probably one of the best, and not just Spider-Man or comic book stories I've ever seen. It's one of the best like animated stories that even it's one of my favorite movies, period.
Yeah, it's my favorite Spider-Man movie as well, and it's definitely high up there amongst animated movies. Like you said, it just looks like a comic book. Like, it's 3D animated, which we're not that used to seeing with comic book movies, and if there are 3D animated comic book movies, sometimes they're not very good looking like this was. Like, it really went all out. It was just eye candy and like flipping through pages of a comic book.
It is definitely eye candy, and we'll go into the animation here because I think just a spoiler for the review. I think the animation here is everything they did right with the first movie and turned it up to 11.
Yeah, because it's been a couple of years, so and the animation looks noticeably better. And it's easy to make it better, especially with how successful the previous one was. So they had to be like, oh, we got pumping as much budget into this as possible, and it just looks incredible. Like, it looks like a step up from something I didn't even know they could step up from, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. How did you feel about this being announced as like the start of a 2-part movie? Or were you irked by that, or were you like, okay, I'll see where this goes? Or do you think they're kind of like overplaying it? Like, do you think it's kind of like, wow, you're really gambling here?
So my reaction when they first announced the title was excitement, because we'd heard that there would be a sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, but we weren't sure when. And in our universe, it finally came out like April 8th, the sequel. So when that title dropped, It excited me because not only were we getting the sequel, like, for sure, but there would also be another one afterward. But you do have a good point. It is the first time in, like, a decade or so that people were generally excited to see a movie title with part one in the title. Because, you know, in the early 2010s, Harry Potter kind of set that trend, you know, Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2, and people were excited for that. But then you had all these other YA things like Twilight Breaking Dawn, Hunger Games, Mockingjay, and then the Divergent series was going to try something similar, but then the third one tanked, and so the fourth one never got made. But yeah, like during the 2010s, people were really fed up with the whole trend of part one and part two, which is probably why Infinity War parts 1 and 2 were retitled as Infinity War and Endgame, probably for the better, because in hindsight they don't really feel like one movie together because of the time skip and whatever. They feel the second one being more focused on a time heist. So I thought that was a good move. But with Across the Spider-Verse parts 1 and 2, I was really excited for this. So what about you?
I was very excited because, again, it kind of shows that they were willing to be like, hey, we're making this as a franchise and we are not afraid to go that far. But at the same time, I was like scared because there was that initial thought in the back of my mind is like, what if they don't strike lightning twice, you know? And what if like you're taking a gamble and you don't hit that same magic you did? I'm not saying it didn't. I'm just saying like that fear was kind of there, like that kind of apprehension, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. When it comes to movies where, you know, you have the standalone first movie, and then later on there's like two movies that feel very much like part one and part two. Like the part one ends up being my least favorite. Deathly Hallows Part 1 was definitely my least favorite Harry Potter movie up until like the second Fantastic Beasts movie, and now I'm not even interested in where that franchise is going. With Back to the Future Parts 2 and 3, like I love all of them, but Part 2 I definitely felt was my least favorite. Like some of it is a setup for Part 3 and also just retreading the nostalgia of the first movie. And Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest was also Part 1, mostly setup, and then at World's End was when they actually finished stuff. So and again, Infinity War and Endgame, I actually prefer Endgame because Infinity War felt like, I know I said before that they don't feel like one movie together, but just how Infinity War felt kind of incomplete. And also I wasn't really surprised by the ending like other people were. So with Endgame, I felt more hype with all the stuff I was surprised about. So like I guess my personal history is that like part 1 of 2 doesn't always resonate with me as much as part 2.
I'm kind of on the thing of you're really playing like if you go like, oh, it's part 1 of this trilogy or duology, it's I think it's more of a gamble than anything else. Sometimes it works because you're really banking on name brand and the real like, oh my god, that ending, or you really are. There's also that kind of other edge of the sword where you're kind of really just throwing the dice and seeing where they land because, like you said with Divergence, I forgot that was the thing until you brought it up. No,
yeah, I watched a whole like 1 or 2 YouTube video essays on like the fall of the YA genre, and that was brought up. It was pretty funny.
But thankfully, this did not catch snake eyes and fall on black and what other gambling comparisons I could make here. This was a home run.
Yeah, it wasn't a gamble like that Snake Eyes movie we talked about.
Oh, God, I want to forget that.
Yeah, I totally forgot about it until like right now.
So I guess like talking about the film of itself, where did you want to go, Steven, with this review? Because I really want to like just gush about it. I want to gush about this movie.
Yeah, we'll probably go like all over the place because of that. Of course, we got Miles and we got returning characters like Spider-Gwen and the return of Peter B. Parker. And we also get to know other versions of Spider-Man we didn't get to know in the first one. Like, they had teased Spider-Man 2099, voiced by Oscar Isaac himself. And we also get Jessica Drew, played by Issa Rae. Even like the Japanese Spider-Man from the 1978 series, like that was quite a surprise. Like, I don't know where you want to start with this, but I liked how the scene where Miles gets a visit from Gwen, and it's like it just felt very much like coming home, and we're back with these characters, and they're going on a new adventure.
Yeah. You see, and I'm going to say something that I think you might agree with me, is that I feel like Sony should have kept Holland in the MCU and not done anything live action and stayed directly with Miles in animation, because that was their real, like, that's where the real effort was being put. That's where I feel like a lot of, like, the real money was. So I feel like they worked best in their animation department. So that way you could have had your cake and eat it too, where you're like, hey, Marvel's paying us to do the Tom Holland stuff, and we can make our own big bucks with Miles in animation.
Yeah, I definitely feel that they do better with the animation.
Yeah. As for like Spider-Man that we got to see in this movie, there are a ton, and some of them are quick cameos, others play a role. Like you said, the Tokusatsu Spider-Man or Toei Spider-Man, which I thought was the one that made me go yeah, because the original actor who played that character in the Toei series, because talking about Toei, like the Tokusatsu Spider-Man, the Toei Spider-Man, Tokusatsu being like giant robots and all that, to all of you giant monster casuals out there listening,
i.e. me.
That show is insane. It's amazing. Toei and what they did with Spider-Man is not what you think of Spider-Man. Case in point, when he summons Leo Prorodon, you have to say it like that. His giant robot. Yes, he has a giant robot, ladies and gentlemen. And he carries a gun and calls himself the Emissary of Hell. And if you're wondering why that is, the true story, I'll just save it. The reason why that version of Spider-Man does all that is the Emissary of Hell and does all the cool poses is mostly because they thought it was cool. But yeah, so I really liked how they went actually very 2D animation. I think it was the I think Studio Madhouse took over that section when we were in the Toei Spider-Man universe, which was really cool. I need to look back on that. As for others, we got to see a Superior Spider-Man with Otto Octavius and Alfred Molina voicing Spider-Man. Did you catch that?
Oh, that was him?
Yeah, that was Molina. I thought that was really cool. I think it's a nice little send-off for him, because I think he's retired from playing that role after No Way Home. But hey, the money's good, and you don't got to wear CGI tentacles. So you just got to sit in the voice booth.
Yeah, I actually finally read Superior Spider-Man somewhat recently, and I enjoyed it, but I think my favorite telling of it is in the 2017 cartoon. That one was surprisingly good. I think that series, to me, is quality enough to rival Spectacular Spider-Man, which might still be at the top for me, though it's been kind of a while, in terms of the animated series.
I find it funny that as much as I like the Superior era, the main Superior Spider-Man title is not good. I just didn't like it. Probably because Dan Slott, with me, is just not... I think he overstayed his welcome on Spider-Man. But, I think, everyone... It's weird, because I didn't like the Superior Spider-Man title, the main title, but everyone else who wrote Superior Spider-Man, either be miniseries or guest star appearances, got the character and understood, hey, it's Doc Ock in Peter's body doing all this, and I feel like they understood the concept better than Dan did, because I think Dan Slott just was like, it's gonna be so cool.
Yeah, I do kind of get that vibe with some of the Marvel and some DC stuff. Some of it, I mean, because comics are comics, sometimes you'll just get stories where it's like, oh, we're doing this because it looks so cool, blah, type of thing.
Yeah. And there was others, and this one is going, like, I want to get your thoughts on this when they showed this, because I was like, how did Sony get away with that? Did Disney let them do it? There's a scene where basically we have a Spider-Man, a Spider-Girl, and Spider-Boy, like, web-slinging away from the villains, who we'll get to. And they're web-slinging away, and they're fighting all these villains and monsters and whatnot, and then they just rip their masks off, and it's Dipper and Mabel from Gravity Falls. So I'm like, how the hell did they get away with that?
Yeah, because it's like, we were assuming that this would just be all Sony, but I guess they got permission from Disney to do this. Yeah, and they even had that line where, like, they're like swinging by buildings, and they have this line where they say, "Oh, don't let the gravity make you fall," and it's like, oh, duh, like that's a reference to that show you're on.
Yeah, like it's Jason Ritter and Christian Shaw voicing them. Like, at first I thought, oh, this is gonna be like, I guess this is supposed to be Mayday Parker with her brother. I guess that's where. Oh no, that's not what we're doing at all. Like when they pull their masks off, and it's like, oh, that's. I thought, oh, that's a cool homage. And then they refer to each other as Dipper and Mabel, and I went, oh, how did we get here? How much did they pay Chapek to let them do that?
Yeah, like they mentioned something about a portal, and you know, there's been a portal in Gravity Falls before, so it's like not out of the realm of possibility, but it's also such a weird choice to bring these characters into this movie.
Well, I think, like, again, it's more of a cameo than anything else. Like, they don't show up a lot in here, like, and when they do, it's in the background. But I think it's not supposed to be, like, the version we know from the show. I think it's supposed to be them from another universe. Like, a universe where they became Spider-Man.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. It does make me wonder, like, okay, so if that's the case, what about all the other characters? Are all the other characters facsimiles of other Spider-Man characters? Because now I'm wondering, so is Stan Uncle Ben? And I guess Grunkle Ben would probably be the better comparison.
Yeah.
What other Spider-Man were you supposedly surprised by?
Well, there were a couple different ones that really surprised me. Like, there was... I don't know if you've seen, like, this Disney Junior show called Spidey and His Amazing Friends, but...
I've heard of it. I've seen, like, promos for it.
Yeah, it's like they're, like, Peter Parker, Miles Morales, and Gwen Stacy are these kids in the Spider-Man suits. I think Miles is called Spin in that show, like, that's his alias, and they're... You know, it's a very kiddie show, and they look short, and it very much... Like, they're 3D animated, so it was kind of... seamless putting them in this. Like, you could still like see the style that they're from, but it kind of reminded me of I don't know if you've seen Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans, but there is kind of a similar moment where these more kiddie like Teen Titans, like even kiddier than the Teen Titans Go versions, but yeah, here it was like I was taken off guard by it because I was like, whoa, they're in this? I've only seen like the first episode or whatever.
I knew what it was when I saw them, but I was like, okay, I guess Disney let them do that too. But because I don't know what the TV rights or the movie rights, who goes what with Sony and what goes with Marvel.
Yeah, I think Disney has the rights to the animated shows now. Although I think with Spectacular, it's kind of a different area.
Yes, I know Spectacular's directly Sony. That much I know.
Right. But another version that I was even more surprised to see was... did you ever see, like, the 2003 MTV Spider-Man series? I think it was called Spider-Man The New Animated Series.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, like, it almost looks like almost 3D, but like 2.5D or something, and he's voiced by like Peter Parker's voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, if I remember correctly. And that show, like, it got canceled on a cliffhanger with I don't know if you care about me spoiling it, but Peter decides he's Spider-Man no more, and so here it picks him up directly from that. He's like, I'm not Spider-Man anymore, and they sort of have to like give him a pep talk because he's like so grumpy about it for his screen time.
Yeah, and what's crazy is, like, he's getting a pep talk from someone he thinks is his friend, and then suddenly he gets a hole punched through him, and he's instantly killed. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that was really weird.
And the other thing is, too, like, I guess we'll talk about the villains of this story, because I need to explain them.
Okay, yeah.
So the villain of this movie is the Moreland family. Now, for those who are the uninitiated, Moreland was a Spider-Man villain who was supposed to be the next big thing during the start of J. Michael Straczynski's run in Spider-Man, which is really good. But
oh yeah, I started reading that recently. Yeah, I've actually met him before. When he did a talk at Southwestern College a couple years ago or so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he also made my favorite sci-fi show, Babylon 5. But anyway, go on.
No, it's fine. I think he also I think he wrote a movie I like called Ninja Assassin, but that's...
Yeah, he wrote that in, like, just a couple days, I think. I read it in his, like, autobiography, and it sounded insane how quickly he wrote it.
Moreland is kind of like an energy vampire creature who feeds on the totemic powers of people, and initially he was supposed to be a Black Panther villain, but Marvel's like, can you do it for Spider-Man? And it, like, when you think of Moreland, and, like, initially when you think of him, he's like, oh, it makes more sense to be a Black Panther villain, but
yeah, because, like, the whole thing of gravitating toward animals as a totem, but you could also apply that, like, they even mention it in the comics that's what some of the Spider-Man villains do, like, they gravitate toward different animals as their, like, aliases and suits and whatnot.
Yeah, but with Moreland is that he is known for, like, for just that initial run and for killing Spider-Man for a hot minute. But later on, they reused that character when they were doing the multiverse stuff, and we are introduced to his family, which is just a hive mind of psychic vampires who want to feed on Spider-Man across the multiverse. And that's who our villains are, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, it was an interesting choice, because it's kind of a deeper cut than what we've gotten before, which I really appreciate it when they do that, when they dig deeper instead of going with the obvious.
Yeah. I will say that Moreland and his family really do feel like a step down from what Kingpin was in the first film.
Yeah, and Prowler. Well, like, that Prowler reveal, like, even though I knew who he was already, like, just seeing Miles' reaction to Prowler was such a powerful moment, and with the music is just so good.
Yeah. I feel like Moreland kind of is a step down from the villains we got in the first movie, because they don't have any. They're just here to be they're just here to be a threat, and I don't get any like emotional connection to them. And on one hand, I'm fine with that, because I don't need every one of my villains to be sympathetic or empathetic towards. I don't need that, but at the same time, give me a reason why they should be scary, other than, ooh, we're coming to eat you.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's kind of like one of those pitfalls that some movies go into, where they make the first movie so good and they go ahead with a better villain, and then for the next one it's like, okay, who do we use next? Like, we can't use, like, the same villains as before. I guess we'll go with these guys. Like, yeah, I get it.
I will say, though, that I do like the voices they got for the Moreland family, especially, like, Moreland's father, Kevin Conroy, is the head of the family. I thought that was really cool.
I recognized his voice instantly. I was like, wait a minute, is that? And, like, the more I heard him speaking, I was like, okay, that's totally Kevin Conroy, or either that or a really good impressionist. But yeah, in the credits it said Kevin Conroy, and it's just, yeah, so good.
Yeah, the moment he says, "You stupid boy," and like, oh, I know who that is.
Yeah.
What did you think of the other voice actors for the Moreland family?
So I thought it was an interesting choice having Diedrich Bader as another one of the family members. And it's like, oh, are they just pulling from like different Batman? But I love his voice, so I was fine with it, I guess.
I did notice that they made like a lot of more family members. They made up a lot of them. I mean, they didn't use a lot from the comics. They just used Moreland and made up like other different members. Because there is a Moreland family in the comics, but this is not them. So
right.
Maybe they changed stuff around. Like they had, who was it? Like, I knew his name. It was so like Kevin Grevereau, who, if that name does not sound familiar to anyone, that is the guy behind like all of the Underworld movies.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen the Underworld movies. Like, after watching all the Resident Evil movies and knowing that the Underworld series seems pretty similar, I'm just kind of put off from trying it.
They're not good, but like I think he's a really good voice actor, as well as like direct. He's also created some characters for Marvel.
Okay.
Yeah. He's also helping to form the Milestone movies for DC Comics.
Oh yeah. Yeah, which ones are in development right now?
Static. I know Static is first and foremost, and I think the next one is going to be Icon, and then Blood Syndicate.
Yeah, like Static is the only Milestone property I was familiar with. Like originally, I think they were like separate from the DC main continuity, but then got integrated, right?
Yeah, they were a separate thing, then they got integrated, and now they're back to being a separate thing.
Okay. Yeah, that should be interesting.
Yeah. But getting back to the movie, like Kevin Grevereau was here. He did this really cool like a brother to Moreland, who's kind of like he's the more like violent one. Where Moreland himself, who did you find Jonathan Frakes as kind of like a good pick? Because I thought he did a really good job as Moreland.
Yeah, it's funny because with Jonathan Frakes, you know, I'm a Star Trek nerd, so I'm so used to him as Riker and, you know, all the memes and stuff. But of course, he also did a hell of a job in Gargoyles. I know he directed Clockstoppers, which is a silly movie, but that notwithstanding, he was great in Gargoyles, and so it's a real great choice as a voice actor here.
It really does feel like he hasn't missed a beat from doing villain stuff for Xanatos, because it's straight up Xanatos he's doing, which I'm totally fine with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they like Moreland, they kind like I'm glad they kind of followed like what he was in JMS, where he's just like he's kind of calculating, but at the same time he can just flip that switch to being a monster. So, yeah, I'm glad they made him at least interesting in that he's the one who wants to have, like, a big plan, which we don't know yet because this is part one. But he has this big plan involving both the Spider-Men and his family, but we don't know what game he's playing.
Yeah, it definitely, like, even though the villains are kind of a step down, like, he definitely has a presence here.
And who knows, maybe it'll be fixed in part two. Like, then it'll be like, once we see, like, both part one and two, it's like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand. Okay, he's a good villain. But that all hinges on part two. But at the same time, I don't want my movies to hinge on the success or betterment of the second film, and I'm tired of that in these new trend of films. Like, I just want these movies to be held up in their own accord. Like, I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, a movie, like, even if it's part of a series, should be able to stand on its own without relying on, oh, this will pay off in the next movie. Like, you can have a bit of that, but you shouldn't rely on every single thing paying off in the next movie. Like, a good chunk of it should pay off in the first part. Yeah.
There's this scene where we get back with Peter. Peter has been back with MJ, and they've actually like having a kid together. And this ripped my heart out because like Moreland and his siblings are all at their house, and you see like Peter getting MJ and his daughter out of the house while he is just fighting these guys, and he is just getting trounced by Moreland and his family. It hit home because you see like Miles and the rest of the Spider-Men are trying to get to him, but the machine they're using to pop in between universes is like overheated, and they can't get to him, and all they can do is watch as Peter is just beaten to death by these guys.
Yeah, it was very heartbreaking, that scene. It's like, I'm not gonna lie, I shed some tears for like a minute.
Yeah. And the last thing, like, it's intercut with him talking. Miles is like having the scene, like this memory of him and Peter having this conversation of like, it's a leap, you got to take that leap, and it's like it's intercut as he's like watching Peter just get absolutely murdered by Moreland.
It's kind of like Miles is re-experiencing what he saw with the Chris Pine Spider-Man who died in the first movie, and but here it's even tougher because this is a Spider-Man who actually mentored him, and now it's very much like that trope in the hero's journey that we're used to, albeit we're so used to like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Qui-Gon Jinn dying in the first movie as opposed to the second movie. So this was really a surprise. I didn't expect them to go this direction in the second movie.
Yeah. It's a definite punch to the gut, but I will say I love that scene where they finally manage to get through after Peter's like just lying on the ground dying. Miles just comes flying in. It felt so gratifying because Miles comes flying in with his venom sting and grabs Moreland by the side of the face and is like just shocking him, like holding him, and he's like burning his face. And when Moreland like knocks him off, he's just like, "Oh, I gotta go." He's like, "I'm gonna get you, kid."
Yeah, it was super intense. And I also love how, Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman, I wasn't super familiar with her. Like, my main experience was, she was a playable character in the game Marvel Ultimate Alliance, but the controls for her, like, she wasn't really that impressive. But here, she really has her moments to shine and is really a worthy opponent to, like, all these, like, adversaries that they're going up against.
Yeah. And I've never understood why, because Spider-Woman, for the most part, has been kind of her own character, not connected with Spider-Man, so I don't know why Marvel doesn't have the rights to her, and the movie rights to her, but I guess the reason the loophole was because she was a clone in the Ultimate Universe, and that's what they go here, is that it's more like the Ultimate Universe, Jessica Drew, who was a clone of Peter Parker, and they bring up the clone saga in here. At least the Ultimate version, which is probably the best of the clone sagas we've had.
Yeah, the superior one, you might say.
Right. She's really good. I think she is definitely I would say like she gives the best like voice acting performance behind Miles, and she is very much like the second in command of this Spider-Man army.
Yeah. And what'd you think of Oscar Isaac's performance as Spider-Man 2099?
We should talk about him. Oscar Isaac, first off, he gets to play, this is his third Marvel character?
Yeah.
He does a great performance. I think he plays intimidating. I think he does a really good Miguel O'Hara, and more of like a one that's clearly he's gotten his ass handed to him a lot in life. And I also like, as an added bonus, they do a little thing from the comics where they use shock as a swear in 2099. So I was like, and when he goes, "Oh, shock this," and I'm like, people are like in the theater going, "What's a dumb thing to say?" I was like, he said shocked.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Maze Runner, where they use words like "shuck it" as like their own swear word. But yeah, I didn't know that this was a thing in the comics.
Yeah, there's like a moment I love in here because it made me almost bust out laughing. I did refrain from it, but there's like a scene where Moreland's siblings have surrounded Isaac. I mean, I almost called him Isaac, Miguel. And Miguel is like looking around. And he's like, "Oh, shock me sideways."
Yeah, and I also found it heartwarming how, like, he's from a future somewhere, but he really enjoyed like meeting these other spider people and seeing what they're like, because I guess like because in Spider-Man 2099, like in his world, like there have been Spider-Men before that he didn't get to interact with, as I explained here. So he really loved the opportunity to be able to team up with these others here.
Yeah. I do also like, and it's kind of a sad moment where we get to this room because they're all like an HQ inside Toei Spider-Man's Leopardon mech. And there's a room in there that shows like all these torn and damaged masks of all the Spider-Men who've been killed by Morlun so far. And it's just a giant wall. And the one that made me go, no, was seeing Spider-Ham's mask.
Oh yeah, that was, because he's such a silly character, he felt like untouchable, but seeing how they handled it here, it was like, there's a collective gasp in the theater. Like, on the level of the Winter Soldier's identity reveal, which I already knew, but many people at the time, like, in the theater didn't know.
Oh, that hurt. Like, I was like I was looking on the wall and was like, please don't let Nick Cage be dead. And thank God he's not.
They really do go a bit darker here.
Yeah, Spider-Man Noir's still alive, and he's like, he brings up this moment because he said, they're talking about how Spider-Ham died, and he said he gave his life so we could find you, like we could find you, Miles.
Yeah, and then like you could see the emotion in Miles's eyes when he hears that. It's like, he feels this weight of responsibility. He's like, was some of this my fault? But it's like, they try to give each other a pep talk, as spider people do,
Yeah, and then in comes Oscar Isaac, who's I keep saying Oscar Isaac, but like here comes Spider-Man 2099, and he like gives the talk of we're gonna keep fighting no matter what, and we're gonna I need every Spider-Man available. And meanwhile, you have Superior Spider-Man up in the rafters, like kind of being the nihilist, because he's like, I crunched the numbers, we're all f***ed.
Yeah, but he says shocked, and then 2099 is like, hey, that's my word.
Yeah, it's like literally a moment where he's about to say, we're all, and he sees children in the room, shocked.
Yeah. Before I forget, I want to ask what you thought about how Miles's roommate, Gank Lee, had a bit more to do in this movie.
I thought he was pretty cool. He doesn't get to do a lot, probably more in the second film. I will say that it was kind of nice because that's clearly who they were basing Ned off of in the MCU trilogy.
Right.
And I feel like they're just repeating the same character though, which is fine, but here he has more of the I'm the fun, dumpy sidekick who gets to say all the dumb shit, but somehow gets to do the one thing that needs the plot done.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's the one who figures out how to override the overheating system and the teleportation devices they can get to save, well, quote unquote, save Peter from dying. Good job.
Right, yeah. And I thought it was funny when there was that quick cameo from a Spider-Man who is Gank Lee from a different universe.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. Oh yeah, I forgot that there was a cameo of the 60s Spider-Man from the 60s cartoon, and they even had his voice actor.
Oh yeah, that was a neat one. Yeah, great little Easter egg.
Who I hope we'll get in the second film? I hope we get Christopher Daniel Barnes voicing 90s cartoon Spider-Man.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
I even want but I do want Josh Keaton in here in the next film too.
Yeah, Josh Keaton would be great. Just bring him back.
Yeah.
What'd you think of? I know we're jumping around, but I just wanted to ask, what'd you think of the music in this one compared to the first one?
Oh, the music, the composed music or the soundtrack?
Well, I guess both. I know they reused Sunflower again, a bit repetitively, I'd add, but They also included Across the Universe, the Beatles song, because of course it's in the title. So there is like soundtrack stuff as well as score stuff. But what'd you think of either one?
I thought it was pretty good. I think the composed music is definitely on the same par as the first one. The soundtrack, though, it's kind of funny because everyone made this running joke of like, oh, the Black Panther soundtrack is the best comic book soundtrack ever, and then the next image is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse soundtrack.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, Into the Spider-Verse soundtrack is the best soundtrack.
Yeah, it is. Like, I was actually surprised how good the Black Panther soundtrack was, but I do agree that Into the Spider-Verse is a step up from it.
Absolutely. I think there's some wonderful stuff in music-wise. I think they also got some great... they got some great people. Like Paul McCartney. We got Paul McCartney. Like when you brought up Across the Universe, he just does like a more slower cover of Across the Universe.
Yeah, if that was
the same guy who was part of the band.
I think it would just be. I don't think it would be considered a cover. Like it would be. I don't even know if there's a name for it, but I know that whenever, like, again, I'm a huge Yes fan, and whenever a member of Yes plays a Yes song like on their solo shows, I never see it as a cover. It's just like, oh, they're playing something they were part of, and I don't know if there's a technical term for it, but yeah, maybe I'll like Google this a bit more afterward. I'm curious now.
Okay. Was there any other people you were surprised on the soundtrack with?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they got Billie Eilish on the soundtrack. Like, I guess, Billie's a rising star, so, I guess it's not that much of a surprise, but yeah, like, the song that Billie sang for this was, like, I think that's gonna win some sort of award, probably.
Oh, yeah. I think another one, and, I think this is kind of a cool. I thought it was cool that they brought in. It was a mix of Future, the artist, the rap artist. I don't know if you heard of him, if you heard his music.
No, I'm not familiar with that artist, but maybe I've heard it on the radio or something.
Yeah, but they had Future with The Weeknd, and oddly enough, it was kind of weird but funny, and also it somehow worked of having Ozzy work with the three of them. Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah.
Essentially what is the Moreland theme, which is this dark kind of like, I'm the boss, I'm the guy who's gonna like it's a song more or less about we're gonna hurt you bad.
Yeah, it's wild how many huge guests they got for this soundtrack.
But all in all, I still say like this is really good. But I if you were to put a gun to my head and said which is the best of the two albums, I'd still say the first one.
Yeah, and if you say it's the second one, the person with the gun will be like, wrong answer, and then pull the trigger.
Yeah, this was a really good movie. I cannot stop talking about it. Like, I was afraid this was just going to be like lightning didn't strike twice. It struck twice hard, and hopefully it'll strike a third time.
Yeah, like the final battle was just like it was well coordinated. It didn't feel like it dragged on too long. Like everyone had their moment. Do you want to talk about the credit scenes?
We just check it back in with Moreland, who is just kind of like he's looking at his face, like just all messed up from what Miles did, and he's like, price to pay. But then he looks over at this huge machine, and he's like, and then he just repeats, a price to pay.
Yeah. Yeah, but the one that really got me and like surprised everyone was, well, it's kind of a montage, really. Like, first they see like 3 other Spider-Men come out of thin air, and it's none other than the Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, but in 3D. And then you see like it's like a little montage. You see like a couple other characters. Like you see the PlayStation for Spider-Man, like with his original appearance, and then suddenly his face changes and he's like, whoa, what happened? And then you also see like Haley Steinfeld's character from Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, because she voices Gwen here, like she gets pulled in, and you also see Oscar Isaac's Moon Knight get pulled in. I don't know if it's the same one from the show or like some variant or from some other similar universe, but it's like, wow, they're really relying on more cameos for the next one, I guess, and it kind of worries me, but at the same time, I'm really curious, like, how they'll do all this.
Yeah. On one hand, I'm like, this is really cool, but on the other hand, I'm like, do we need it? Doesn't need any more, like, outside help from Marvel, or they're just Sony strong arm. I don't know what the logistics are, but I just don't want a movie, and I talked about this earlier, I don't want a movie's merits based on how well it's going to do with it from another film. I wanted to be judged on its own merits. That's what kind of bothered me about the Star Wars trilogy, because it all felt like one long trilogy, and all it took was one bad movie to make me go, never mind. Because now it has that, and I like a lot of the stuff with the sequel trilogy, but Rise of Skywalker just left such a bad taste in my mouth and I sound like such a incel right now, and I apologize, but like, I just did not like Rise of Skywalker. I'm not saying it's the worst thing ever. I'm just saying, like, it's not a good movie, and it really did, like, hurt the rest of the trilogy for me, because now it's like, this is all canon, it's all intrinsically connected, and I feel like it's kind of hurt the other two films.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Like, I'd even extend that to The Last Jedi. Like, the reasons I dislike aspects of it for reasonable reasons. Like, I love how they handled Luke and Rey's storyline, but I felt like they didn't know what to do with the Resistance storyline, and it was just so frustrating to watch. And so I thought that maybe the third movie could improve things a bit, but it didn't really. So yeah, like, I think The Force Awakens is definitely the strongest of those three.
Yeah. But outside of Star Wars, like, it kind of applies here, where it's like, I don't want the third movie, if it's bad, it's just going to hurt. I feel like it's going to damage my viewing experience to the other two films.
Yeah, like, they even mentioned how, like, the 3 Spider-Man from No Way Home, like, they briefly mentioned we're being hunted, and it's like, oh, is it Kraven? It's like, kind of stupid the way they leave things hanging like this.
Yeah, but all in all, if we were to give its merits to its own film, and it's really hard to gauge, because maybe this rating will drop higher and lower when we get to the third film.
Right.
But as it stands, I recommend it. I think it's a really good film.
Right, so what would your score out of 10 be, and what would the unit of measurement be?
My score would be 9 Arby's sandwiches being eaten by Otto out of 10. The only thing that kept me from being it's a full 10 was, like, it was, again, like, it's the start of what could be a duology or a trilogy. So, and that could either hurt or it could damage it depending on how good the third movie is. So that's what kept it from being a full 10 out of 10. But I really love this movie. You?
Yeah, I'm up there as well. Like, it's not as good as Into the Spider-Verse. That one's probably like a 10 out of 10 for me. Whereas this one, like, it was very exciting. I loved the cameos and how it didn't feel like cameos just for the sake of it most of the time. Like, I felt like they had a really good story here. The villains could be a bit better, and again, we have like that cliffhanger that leaves us kind of worried about the third one, but at the moment, yeah, I do think this is like 9, like, you used Darby sandwiches because of that one scene. I'm going with 9 out of 10 helicopters, because there were so many swinging from helicopters in this movie.
Helicopters!
Yeah.
And I guess, like, we should talk about the Arby's scene, because it's a running gag that Otto likes eating Arby's sandwiches, because he mentions, Miles is like, you really like Arby's sandwiches. He's like, they help me think.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I don't know if that was a joke, and I don't know if it's stuck, but alright.
Man, I've probably gone to Arby's like once or twice in my life, and now I kind of want to go to it again.
Yeah, I used to go to Arby's a lot when I was a kid, but now the last time I've been was 4 years ago, I think. But it's not that I don't hate it. It's just like it never comes up. It's like, hey, do you want to go to? No one goes, hey, you want to go to Arby's for dinner?
Yeah, like it's not always nearby, and if it is, there are often other choices I prefer.
I don't know what Arby's got out of this because I didn't see any promotion for them. But all right, it's you got a joke.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'll do it. So thanks for joining me again, Mr. Multiverse. Where can people find your stuff?
They can find me on YouTube and on Patreon. They can also check out my two short stories within the books, Duel of the Monsters, volumes 1 and 2, which are out. So you can check me out there. And yeah, if you want to see more of me, there you go.
Yeah, and I'll link those in the show notes as usual. And as for me, if you want to email this podcast, you can email delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts on, I don't know, your favorite thing to order from Arby's, I guess. Yeah, and you can follow me at Steven Schinder on Instagram and Twitter, Steven Schinder Storytelling on Facebook. You can find my fantasy horror comedy novel, Lemons and Like Rain. It's on Amazon. Next book, Trespassing Through the Visages, will be out sometime later this year. So, yeah, I'll mention when that's coming out, when I know for sure. And you can also find me on me and my dad's podcast, Yes Shift, where we talk about the band Yes and their members, past and present. We actually recently interviewed their first drummer, Bill Bruford, on both Yes Shift and my dad's Drum Talk TV page. It was such a great conversation. It's like just a bucket list item ticked off. It was great. I'm still like coming to terms with the fact that actually happened. Is amazing. And you can also check out Question Possible Answer, my friend Jesse Bennett's podcast. I'm on the Clock Stoppers episode, which should be out by the time this episode comes out. So yeah, silly Jonathan Frakes directed movie Clock Stoppers. It was a fun conversation. And the next delayed replay episode, which comes out May 7th, will be on Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. But without further delay, have a good day.